Okay, we're going to talk about whether or not it's a good idea to take fish oil, whether or not it's a good idea to eat fish. So the first question is, why do women have big butts? And the reason they have big butts, it's an energetically efficient location to carry omega-3 fats for the baby's growth and development. And there is some good things about omega-3 fats. They help the fluidize plasma cell membranes. That's thought to maybe improve neuronal conduction. There's a relatively high percentage of omega-3 fats in the retina of the eye, which is part of the brain, and the brain itself. It also is like the hourglass female shape is sort of like a female peacock display of fertility. For our ancestors, if a woman had a big belly, that meant she was pregnant. Also, the wider pelvis of a woman is so she can deliver babies. In the old days, for our ancestors, starvation was a concern, not obesity. Okay, now why do doctors prescribe fish oil? The main reason is that it lowers the triglycerides in the blood. Elevated blood triglycerides are a risk factor for increased risk of coronary artery disease. However, a person could lower their blood triglycerides simply by eating less simple sugars, less alcohol, and less dietary fat overall. Also, by exercising, one can lower their blood triglycerides. The omega-3s also have a mild anticoagulant effect, similar to the effect of aspirin. One of the fields I was imaging-guided surgeon in a sense. Interventional radiologist is what it's officially called, where we do tons of procedures. I've done many thousands of procedures, and I can tell you, I never once had a bleeding problem related to omega-3s. We did not even change our plan. If we're going to do a procedure, a spinal tap, a portacath, whatever it might be, we would just do the case. So that you'd look at omega-3s as a thing adding to whatever else they were taking, but it was not that big of a deal. Okay, a lot of doctors believe that it has a cardioprotective effect. And I did watch a whole bunch of videos supporting omega-3 supplementation, because I wanted to hear a wide variety of opinions on the subject. Some have thought that it's beneficial in adults, for the brain and for the retina. There's a lot of famous doctors who recommend fish oil. And I can tell you, I have friends that are internal medicine doctors who recommend fish oil and say they're reading of the literature. And these are above average internists, pretty experienced guys. They believe that it supports prescribing fish oil to patients for lowering triglycerides. Okay, real quick, we'll go over a little bit about chemical structures of lipids, just fast on this. Okay, so here's an example of a saturated fat. Saturated means saturated with hydrogens, and that means every possible binding site on the carbons has a hydrogen attached to it, other than the carboxylic acid at the end over here, which is, part of the definition of a fatty acid. So a fatty acid has a carboxylic acid at one end, and then the rest of it is just carbons attached to hydrogens. So this is the carboxyl end, and this is the methyl end. The methyl end over here is also called the omega end. And for nutritional purposes, counting begins at the methyl end. It's just easier to work with fatty acids when you count from the methyl end, because all the metabolism happens over here at the carboxyl end. So it would keep on changing shape and number of double bond position if you counted from this side. So we count from the methyl end, the omega end. Okay? Now, unsaturated fats, like let's say palmitic acid, for example, there'll be no double bonds. On this one I screwed up. I forgot to draw the double bond here, but a MUFA means monounsaturated fatty acid. Mono as in one double bond. A PUFA, with the P here, PUFA, is a polyunsaturated fat, so it has two or more double bonds. And an important thing to recognize here on this PUFA, so this would be an omega 6 PUFA, counting from this carbon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, double bond. And then there's what's called a methylene bridge carbon. And then there's another double bond, in this case at the number 9 position. Okay, well, this methylene bridge carbon doesn't have a very good grip on its hydrogen. That hydrogen can relatively easily be plucked off, and you can form peroxyl groups there with two adjacent oxygens and a whole series of reactive oxygen species that can form free radicals and whatnot. And they can lead to destruction of plasma cell membranes and mitochondrial membranes. That process is called lipid peroxidation. And it's a bad thing. When PUFAs like omega-3s are spoiled, called going rancid, a lot of times that's what's being referred to, lipid peroxidation of the PUFA. And that can be damaging to health. Okay, just a little bit more of a concept about fatty acid nomenclature. So this would be the C18 family of fatty acids. C18 means the number of carbons. So 18 carbon with 0 double bonds is called stearic acid. 18 carbon with 1 double bond is called oleic acid. The olive plant, like in Latin, is olea, so that's where olive oil comes from. And that's the main fatty acid in olive oil. Okay, it's a MUFA, 1 double bond. All right, C18-2 at the omega-6 position. W means omega. Okay, so omega-6 position at number 9 position is linoleic acid. That's La. That's one of there's two essential fatty acids. Linoleic acid, and I remember La, 2 letters and 2 double bonds. Okay, and that is the sort of parent essential version of the omega-6 fatty acids. The subsequent omega-6 fatty acids built off that, like our arachidonic acid, those are derivatives of the parent La. Okay, and then if you want to talk about the omega-3 family of fatty acids, you're going to start out with alpha-linolenic acid, and that's ALA. And you can remember the 3 letters ALA indicates 3 double bonds, and those are the 2 essential fatty acids. Okay, so what about blood glucose and obesity? Well, eating fat causes insulin resistance, including omega-3 fats increase insulin resistance. That's why, to me, it sounds a little bit ridiculous that you're going to decrease your cardiovascular risk by taking something that's going to increase insulin resistance. Things that increase insulin resistance increase cardiovascular risk. And, you know, most Americans, they're fat and sick because they eat too much fat. Okay, so eating more fish fat, is that really going to solve their problems? You know, the magic fish going to come and save the day? Maybe they should eat less fat. All right, so a couple more thoughts here. Insulin resistance syndrome, metabolic syndrome as it's called, is really insulin resistance syndrome. And it's a form of prediabetes leading into diabetes eventually. And when a person increases their daily fat intake over time, that tends to lead to weight gain. Increased weight gain is associated with more hypertension and diabetes. Hypertension and diabetes are associated with more atherosclerosis. There's a couple papers here, references referring to the increased insulin resistance associated with omega-3 fats. The next thing, some additional problems with eating fish. You know, there's a lot of saturated fat in eating fish. Now, I'm kind of talking about 2 things here, fish oils and eating fish. I can tell you this, eating fish is definitely a bad idea. So the real question is eating fish oil something different? Just a couple quick problems with eating fish. Fish also contains a lot of saturated fat, which tends to make people fat. Saturated fat's obviously atherogenic. That's been talked about at length, written about at length. It's often prepared in a non-stick cookware, which can put chemicals into the food. It's often fried. You get additional oil and distorted fats from the cooking in the fish. And also, you look at fish oil, for example. We talked about the methylene bridge carbon such that it's very prone to oxidation, lipid peroxidation. It has to be put in an opaque bottle, stored in the fridge, because even just sunlight at room temperature will oxidize it. Well, it's going to oxidize much more rapidly when it's in your body at 98.6 degrees compared with room temperature. And then you're going to put the fish into an oven and cook it. Okay, so you're going to heat it up to the max. You tell me that's not going to oxidize the fats? Come on, it's ridiculous. Okay, animal protein in general is carcinogenic. We spoke about that at length. Fish often contains tons of pollutants: mercury, PCBs, persistent organic pollutants, organochlorines, estrogenic chemicals. You know, how's that going to be good for you? Okay, so this is just briefly another discussion, a little bit more detail of the lipid peroxidation. And also, if you're eating rancid fats or it's becoming peroxidized as you're in the process of absorbing it, you know, then you're going to be using up your antioxidants to deal with that. It's kind of a waste. Okay, is fish oil cardioprotective? And you're going to see studies. One study will say it's a little cardioprotective. The other one says, no, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. But you know, I've been in medicine 30 years, and I can tell you, usually when something works, it's good. It's obvious that it's good. If you want to puncture blood vessels for catheter angiography, for putting in central lines, it's great to have an ultrasound and see the blood vessel when you go in. You can see certain things are obvious. To do a CT angiogram is obviously going to provide you with more detail than an MR angiogram. There's no doubt about it. whenever something's kind of a little this, a little that, a little this, a little that, it usually is really not much of a different. Maybe there's some situations where it's a little different, but it's not some universal good thing. So I'm just giving you here some references. If you want to read more about it, you can. But basically, the impression I got from reading about it was there's no significant cardioprotective benefit. So it's kind of a wash. Its ability to be cardioprotective. You know, the fish obviously is bad, but I'm saying the fish oil, even the fish oil under optimal conditions, really didn't provide a significant benefit from my reading of the literature, and there's quite a bit of literature on it. There were some studies that say it would, there were others that it wouldn't, and the net effect was, I believe, that it didn't indicate a significant benefit. Okay, does fish oil decrease your risk of dementia? Again, you have the problem that whatever you eat of that fish oil, how much of it is rancid, and then how much of it actually gets to your brain and does something useful. And there's a lot of studies showing no benefit. Other studies will tell you that there was some small benefit. Some studies were talking about the brain size and shape being preserved. I'm not a big believer in that. I'm a neuroradiologist. I look at brain MRIs all the time. And a lot of these brain studies, it's difficult to measure a brain because you do 2 MRIs. A lot of times they're done on a different magnet, 1.5 Tesla, 3 Tesla. Other things you'll see is the angle of the slices through the brain are slightly different. It's very difficult to measure things. There's machine noise, there's operator bias, there's operator technical skills. It's not that easy to show a 5% or 10% difference of something. If you say 30-40% difference, I believe that, but a lot of these studies are going to quote real small differences that I'm not so sure they're real. So from what I could read, I didn't see any real decrease in dementia risk. One thing that's been noted in general, persons on vegan diets tend to have better moods, better control of their mood, less likely to have temper outbursts, and I think that's for some of the reasons we talked about in the previous lecture on excitotoxicity. When you have good blood supply to your brain and your hippocampus, you're likely to be in a better mood. The other thing that was coming out of when I was reading about this was, how does oxygen go from when you breathe it into your lungs to get all the way into your cells? It has to cross a lot of cell membranes, and it does seem that the omega-6 fatty acids have some benefit to that. And I'm not recommending supplementation of them either. I'm just saying there is something biologically going on that's interesting, and they facilitate it, I believe. Okay, does fish oil increase cancer risk? Probably the most notable paper was the one by Theodore Brasky out of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Institute, indicating that omega-3 were associated with increased risk of prostate carcinoma, including aggressive prostate carcinoma. And that researcher, a pretty famous guy, said that he believed it was accurate, and some additional studies have shown evidence to support that claim. Others have commented that there seems to be an immunosuppressive effect from omega-3s that in rat studies showed increased risk of colon cancer metastases to the liver. So that's one thought. Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about, can humans get enough omega-3s and omega-6s from plants? Well, omega-6s and 3s, they only come from plants. The actual, Antarctic fish that have a lot of omega-3s, that's because they live in such a cold climate, but they don't make them themselves. And so they come from plants originally, some algae as well. If you want to call that a plant. But what I'm trying to say is plants have the essential fatty acids. They've got both of them. And if you just eat plants, you will get those fatty acids. I'll show some actual numbers for individual foods in just a moment here. Humans are, of course, unable to put a double bond at the omega-6 or 3 position, but we are able to convert, the essential fatty acids, the LA and the ALA, to both the omega-6s and the omega-3s. And it's also now looking from the research that we need to make far less. You don't always need to convert the essential 18-carbon LA or ALA into the longer DHA and EPA. For example, look at cardiolipin. Cardiolipin is a special type of lipid in the intermitochondrial membrane in particular. It just stays as C18-2, linoleic acid. All right, and there's tons of them, tons of mitochondria. Average cell, depends where it's located. Let's say it has about 1,000 mitochondria. Okay, that's a lot. And it might even be the case that when a person takes omega-3 supplements, they're typically taking DHA and EPA, that they're all taking the end product, the end of the line of omega-3s, the long chain omega-3s, and they might really have no need for that, such that they're overdosing on those. And is that a good idea? Probably not. You may be predisposing oneself to a lot of lipid peroxidation, and you're going to keep your antioxidants pretty busy dealing with that. When they measure the blood levels, vegans are not deficient in omega-3s. You know, if you're eating a plant-based diet, you're getting plenty of omega-3s. We need more omega-6, it turns out, than omega-3. Cardiolipin, like I said, the mitochondrial fatty acid, often a cardiolipin, it's a special type of fatty acid, phospholipid. It'll have 4 linoleic acids on its tail rather than just 2 like a typical phospholipid. It's got a rather unique structure. So yeah, and here's a paper by Sanders, 2009, Essential Fatty Acid Requirements of Vegetarians in Pregnancy, Lactation, and Infancy. And the bottom line is we can get enough from just eating plants. We do routinely get enough from just eating plants, and you don't need to supplement. Okay, so here's something a little bit interesting. These are just some of the numbers of how much essential fatty acids are present in an apple. So you got W6s, 141 milligrams per pound, W3s, 32 milligrams per pound. Blueberries got lots, okay, 400 on the W6, 263 milligrams per pound on the omega-3s. Look at lettuce. Lettuce has got lots of both omega-6s and omega-3s. So what I'm trying to say is if you just eat these plants, you know, you should eat a salad every day. Try to eat 1 salad every day. All right, if you're just eating plants, though, you're getting all this stuff. It's not like, you know, you need to eat the magic pill with the magic fish, okay? Walnuts have a lot of both. And one thing I did get out of this is I do think, you know, after studying these fatty acids quite a bit, I got the impression it's probably a good idea to make sure you're eating some raw plants every day. Yeah, starch is going to be the main source of all your calories, but I think that some of these raw plant foods, they just give you the nutrients in an undistorted form. Cooking can distort foods a little bit. That's sort of what we're made for. Because you think about it, we're the only animal on Earth that cooks its food. Okay, the chemicals our body works on, and our ancestors probably did. I don't know when we discovered fire. I don't know when Prometheus stole it from Zeus, but raw foods have a lot of good nutrients in them. And some of these people that are incredibly healthy, look at that Ruth Hydrich, that extraordinary lady who recovered from metastatic breast cancer and became world champion in triathlons and marathons, senior division. And, you know, she was eating more and more raw food. And so was that other incredible lady, Annette Larkins, you know, the most beautiful grandma who looked like she was 35 when she was in her 70s. She was eating raw food. You know, the pitfall you run into as a raw food vegan is, you know, how do you satisfy your calories? Because you end up probably eating a lot of fat stuff, a lot of nuts, which I don't think is a good idea. But I think it's good to make sure you're getting some raw fruits and vegetables every day, a significant amount. I like Chef AJ's idea of eat some vegetables in the morning to get yourself to do it. Because if you don't eat those vegetables when you start your day, you might never do it. Once you chow down on a big bowl of potatoes and rice and beans or something, you fill yourself up so much you might not want to go back for that salad. Okay, how about some evolutionary perspective? Our theoretical nearest animal cousins to chimps and gorillas, they don't eat fish. Okay, so why should we? All right, they eat plants, especially the gorillas. All right. Our theoretical place of origin, let's say equatorial Africa, it's hot. Okay, you don't need omega-3s where it's hot. Any fish at the watering hole would probably not have too many omega-3s in that environment because they're more unstable in the membranes. So the likelihood of us being dependent on omega-3s originally for brain development, and it's the importance of omega-3s is being exaggerated is what I'm saying. Okay, yes, there is a true importance, but it's not like we need to keep on eating these little fish tablets. Another thing too, intrinsically, you know, you put a bowl of fruit on the table, you salivate, you're made for that. When you look at a fish, do you want to eat it? No, it's disgusting. You can eat it once it's cooked and it's flavored with some sauce and all that stuff, but it's not our natural reaction. A cat would just want it. And like I said too, you cook a fish, you're going to oxidize the little PUFAs, and then you're going to be eating all these oxidized PUFAs with lipid peroxidation issues. I don't think that's such a great idea. Fish is an animal muscle. All animal muscle increases the risk of cancer. The protein contents, the saturated fat. We've talked about that before in other lectures. Other things people say, well, fish are so healthy. Look at the healthy populations, eat a lot of fish. Well, when you look more closely at them, for example, at the Okinawas, when they had their centenarian incredible aging, they were only eating 3% animal products, and that was a combination of fish and some pork, which, obviously isn't too healthy, but they kept it to 3% of their diet. So what I'm trying to say is these healthy Asian populations that have been mentioned in the past, they were eating tons of rice, 80 to 90% of their calories from rice, and tiny amounts of fish. I don't think fish was the reason for their relatively good health. Okay, a couple more thoughts on which doctors recommend avoiding fish oil, for example. Dr. McDougall, okay, he's probably the best nutrition doctor in the world. And good luck finding McDougall screw up, okay? I study nutrition all the time. I haven't found McDougall screw up. I think he leaves things out sometimes. I'll sometimes recognize there's additional stuff he could have included. Like when he talks about breast cancer. Yeah, he's awesome on breast cancer. But he doesn't talk much about estrogen chemistry, which I think is also highly relevant. But the point I'm making is McDougall has studied this subject extensively, okay? And in his conclusion was, we always get enough omega-3s from eating plant foods, and we don't need to ever take fish oil, ever, including when a woman's pregnant, including when a child's developing. It's a non-issue, okay? And he covers that quite extensively in his book, Starch Solution, which is an incredibly great book, okay? From 2012. All right, Nathan Pritikin. Okay, Nathan Pritikin was a genius who went through all the literature of nutrition ever written up to his time, and he came to the conclusion, fat is bad. Avoid it as much as you possibly can. He also studied diets where people ate incredibly low amounts of fat, and he said there's no such thing as a fat-deficient diet. It's impossible to eat too little fat. Just from whatever diet you eat of plant foods, you're going to get more than enough fat. As a matter of fact, it's been referenced, the Winnett study of 1970. Winnett's put a bunch of patients into like a metabolically defined diet plan where they only ate 0.7% fat. So that's 0.7, less than 1% fat. And it was given in the form of the omega-6 essential precursor, linoleic acid. And that was for 6 months. And the persons had no side effects. They came out of there feeling great, physically and mentally. So that's an important point. We could be quite healthy with less than 1% fat. Potatoes have about 1% fat, and people could live off potatoes and water for over 6 months in a metabolic ward and be quite healthy. So that's an important thing to recognize. Our need for fat is very, very low. All right, and then there's the other little secret fat we've talked about before, whereby the body converts some of the fiber in the colon into short-chain fatty acids, and we get a little bit in that way. So our need for fat is much less than was previously recognized. Take a look at Walter Kempner. He treated over 19,000 patients. He put them on a 95-5 diet. Incredibly low amounts of fat. So by 95-5, I mean 90% carbohydrate, 5% protein, and 5% fat. That's the approximate numbers. They're right about in that ballpark. And he had incredible results, incredible weight loss. He showed reversal of EKG findings. So again, the greatness of Pritikin and Kempner was reducing fat compared to the standard American diet, not looking for how to add more fat to one's diet. McKean used the same diet as Winnett's and also got incredible results. He was treating children with phenylketonuria, and what was incredible about it was, despite feeding them less than 1% fat, a bunch of children, they were growing fantastically. They were growing rapidly. They grew great. So, fat deficiency was a non-issue, just giving them linoleic omega-6, okay? And the point I would say as well here is most modern adults in the urbanized world, they're fat and sick because they eat too much fat, sugar, and sodium. And eating a little more extra fish fat, in a capsule, I just need this magic fish, that's not going to resolve those problems. Dr. Esselstyn, he's got the best results in the world for any doctor for prevention of coronary artery disease. 99.4% of his patients out of 198 with no recurrent cardiovascular events. The only patient who had a recurrent event is somebody who didn't follow the diet. So essentially, it's like 100%. You can tell you, if you follow that diet, it's extremely unlikely that you'd have a cerebrovascular, cardiovascular event, all right? And so that's incredible results. And, he didn't allow his patients a single drop of oil, not one drop. And this idea that you're just going to take this magic capsule of fish fat and you're not going to become demented and you're not going to have coronary artery disease, I think it's ridiculous, okay? You can get your adequate omega-3s and omega-6s from eating plant foods, and I think that's the right thing to do, and I think that's what our ancestors did. Many of them lived inland. They didn't have ready access to fish. All oils are highly processed food. I think if there wasn't any money in this, I don't think there'd be much talk about it. And yes, I do realize there's some pretty intelligent people who do think fish oil is a good idea and recommend it. Many of them sometimes, though, too, are selling it, which I think can induce some bias, or they're getting paid to do research on it. If you get paid to do research, you have to please whoever's paying you, or they'll never hire you again. Dr. Klaper, another famous nutrition doctor, he says he used to recommend omega-3s, but upon further research information becoming available, he no longer does so. Again, he's concerned about the increased risk of prostate cancer and some other things. And like I said, too, in medicine, usually when something's better, it's obvious. When there's a back and forth, there's usually not that much benefit there. Okay, I just included a couple references in addition to the ones already, if anybody wants to read those. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. My personal feeling is I don't take omega-3 fish oils. I briefly took them about 15 years ago, but then when I started reading about them, I'm like, hey, this is not a good idea. And so I quit taking them. But, you can read, watch all the information, decide for yourself. Hope that's helpful.